coming here today.
Thanks for having me.
We really appreciate it. I think we'll begin. As I mentioned in the hallway.
Well, Suzanne, why don't we everyone tell them what we all do?
Okay, sure, that'd be fun.
I'm Tom Merce, I'm the content editor in the newsroom.
And a fine first name you have, too.
I'm Suzanne Cassidy, I'm the opinion editor.
Karen Lee, the political reporter.
Good to see you again, Tom.
I'm Jan Kirkpatrick, president of LNP.
I'm Barb Hofroda. I am the executive editor.
Bob Krasny, the publisher of LNP. Nice to see you. Thank you very much for coming.
Yes, thank you for having me.
We appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
We do appreciate it. As you may or may not know, our paper has changed somewhat in recent months. We've redesigned, we rebranded, but we also combined our editorial pages. In the
Right.
past, we had an editorial page that kind of leaned Democratic, another one that leaned Republican. We've combined them independent to one independent voice of LNP.
Good.
So, so with that in mind, I think we'd like to start, if you wouldn't mind, just telling us a little bit about why you're running, but also then we have some specific questions.
Okay, let me just start with the general. I'm a native Pennsylvanian, lifelong Pennsylvanian. I grew up across the river, or although some people here call it the ocean. My mother is from Columbia. I once made the mistake of trying to say that I'm half Lancastrian because my mother's from Columbia, and people in Lancaster just said, no, that's not Lancaster County. But I grew up there, and I am a fan of Pennsylvania, and I really wanted to make my state better. And I thought about running 4 or 5 years ago, back in the 2010 election, and then had to go back to my business to save it, so suspended that and figured that wasn't going to happen. But in the intervening 4 years, I think the state's going backward, and I want to do what my job on my part as a citizen to make it better. So I'm running in part because I don't like the rut we're in. I don't like what we've done to education. I don't like what we've done to our economy. We've actually hollowed it out. And I don't like what's happened at the level of the state. Our government had to basically take out a payday loan a few weeks ago, and we've been downgraded by, I guess, 5 rating agencies, or 5 times by 3 rating agencies over the last 2 years. So I don't like that, but I also see promise in Pennsylvania. I think if we actually invested in education, invested in certain strategic public goods like transportation infrastructure, if we actually took advantage of the natural resources like gas we have here responsibly, and if we had a level playing field from an ethics point of view, from a tax point of view, from a governance point of view, I think we would actually have a better Pennsylvania. So I'm partially running against where we are, and I'm partially running for ideas that I think would actually work.
I think let's start with your question about the first 100 days.
Sure, yeah, let's assume that the polls, as they stand now, hold up through Election Day, and that you are our next governor. Can you lay out for us specifically what your first 100 days are going to look like? What regulations, what rules, what legislation would you seek to roll back? What new legislation, what new rules would you seek to impose? I mean, you talked a little bit just a few seconds ago about the state moving backwards the last couple of years. What would you do in the first 100 days to reverse that?
Okay, I probably, since the budget cycle goes to June 30th, it'd probably be the first 200 days. But 180 days. The first day, I can do some things like sign executive orders. And so, as I said, I think we need to work immediately on ethics issues. I would, first day, ban gifts for anybody I've appointed in the executive branch. Second, I would sign an executive order creating a more transparent and I think fair way of giving legal contracts, because I think that's an issue that we have to address. Then over the first 200 days through that first budget cycle, and my budget address would be in March, I would want to lay out the things that I think we need to do immediately to put Pennsylvania on a solid financial foundation, and I think make the economy and our society fair. So that would include really 4 things. First, I would want to put a Marcellus shale tax, propose a 5% Marcellus shale tax. And would propose in that first budget that some of the money from that 5% tax, which would be somewhere around $1 billion at the current production, that's the estimate that I've seen. But lots of money. Some of that would go back to the localities who are now getting money in the impact fee, which is about a 1.3% tax, based on the way I would calculate it. Some of that second would go to the Department of Environmental Protection to make sure that I would want to make sure we have the right regulations in place, but more importantly, I think we have understaffed the DEP. And I think we probably have taken responsibility away from the Department of Health as well to make sure that we're doing this in a way that does not jeopardize either our environment or our public health. Third, a small portion, we used to have, and some states like New Jersey have incentives to build a bridge to a sustainable energy future. I would want to use some of the money from this Marcellus shale tax to go back to the tax credits, grants, low interest rate loans that we had. It's not a very expensive program, but it was enough to tilt the balance, the investment balance in favor of sustainables. I have a conservative uncle who has solar photovoltaic cells at his house because with the federal and state tax credits, he could actually make it economical. And when you do that, you're actually creating demand that wouldn't otherwise be there, and that demand creates research and development that is making those photovoltaic cells more efficient. So I'd want to continue that. But that would leave hundreds of millions of dollars for education. So I would propose that those additional hundreds of millions would go into education to replace the money that has been taken out. I would, in this first 200 days, would call for a change in the way we reimburse and oversee charter schools, so that we actually move from an average cost funding formula to a marginal cost funding formula that I think would be still fair for the charter schools, but a lot fairer for the public school districts that are supporting these charter schools. I would expand Medicaid. The Healthy PA initiative does have waivers in it that I think, as I understand it, would allow for the governor to just simply expand Medicaid, and which would lower the premiums that, limit the premiums that Medicaid recipients are now paying to get health care under Healthy PA, and I'd set up a statewide exchange. That would probably save a couple $100 million there. I would look at, coming out of my experience and background as Secretary of Revenue, would look to close some loopholes. The most egregious in my mind is the Delaware loophole. That would be in the first 200 days. I would propose that. And I would propose I think those are the big things. The idea would be to create, I'm sorry, on the tax issue, would want to make sure that we have a fair tax system. So in addition to the loopholes, which I think are fairly straightforward things, I'd also propose increasing the share of state funding for public education. Start moving, and it won't happen overnight, but to a 50% level from the 30-some% level it's at now, with the idea that would reduce property taxes, the burden we have now on local taxpayers. Second, I would propose an income tax that is calculated slightly differently than the flat tax we have right now. It's a flat tax, but with an automatic exemption. Right now we have a special poverty provision exemption that is calculus, a complex calculation, but we have one, and a flat fee, or a flat rate on top of that. So it's not something that would require a constitutional amendment. It's what we do right now. And I would propose reducing the corporate net income tax, which C corporations pay 9.99%. It's the highest in the United States. It's a disgrace. So I think those are the things I would try to do in my first 200 days.
I have two quick follow-ups, and I'll let Suzanne talk about the tax system. But on the extraction tax, you mentioned $1 billion in revenue. I've seen various estimates for this, as low as 500 and some million. How confident are you that you're going to get $1 billion out of that?
It's an estimate. When I started doing this, given the production of the wells and the Henry Hub price, it was about $500 to $600 million. The Henry Hub price has risen since the primaries, and the production, the number of wells is actually down, but the production is actually up. So one estimate is about $1 billion. It's an estimate, but somewhere between 600 million and $1 billion. It's a lot of money that would come in from this, and then it would grow. It's hard to be specific again because the Henry Hub price doesn't obtain every place in Pennsylvania. There's some places because we don't have good distribution. I think Susquehanna County is still maybe $2 a thousand cubic feet. The Henry Hub price is north of $4. So it'll depend on not only production, and that production will somewhat depend on distribution.
The second follow-up question I had was closing the Delaware loophole. It seems like such a common sense idea, and yet it never happens. How are you going to get it done?
Yeah, that's right. I was on the Business Tax Reform Commission 10 or more years ago, and we unanimously, Republicans, Democrats, from all walks of life, proposed eliminating the Delaware loophole. When I was Secretary of Revenue, I gave testimony to eliminate the Delaware loophole. I wrote op-ed pieces after I was Secretary of Revenue decrying the Delaware loophole, and I promised throughout this campaign that if elected, I won't eliminate it. I don't know why it's taken so long. It's just that I think the reason is because there's effective lobbying against it.
So I guess Tom's question, how do you see yourself working with the legislature to make that happen when Rendell could, it just hasn't happened over various administrations?
I don't think it was as big a priority in different gubernatorial campaigns or different administrations as it would be for me. And maybe again, it's that perspective as having been Secretary of Revenue, but it's one of the unfairnesses in our system. The way the Delaware loophole works is we have the highest average corporate net income tax rate in the United States. There's one state, I think, that has a higher top marginal rate, that's Iowa, but their average rates are much below 9.99%. The way it works is that we're a separate company reporting state, and it means that you can set up a subsidiary in Delaware that actually gets fees from your Pennsylvania affiliate, and they charge an amount that basically equals your Pennsylvania net income. Therefore, you don't pay taxes in Pennsylvania. It's used by the bigger companies. The smaller C corporations don't use it. I was on the board of a small C corporation that paid 9.99%. And it's one of the problems with targeted tax cuts. The people who are best able to get those tax cuts and have the wherewithal to lobby and create representation get the tax cuts. And the broad-based tax reform doesn't take place. So I think the reason it hasn't happened in the past is because that lobbying has been so effective. But I think it's possible I'd be able to stand up and say this doesn't work. I can explain it. I understand how it works. Having seen it and learned about it in those different venues I talked about. And I think if people understand how it works, and I think they understand that the consequences of that are that small businesses get hit with too high taxes, and that Pennsylvania's economy gets hit because people look at Pennsylvania and they get sort of a sticker shock. And they say, we don't have to, we're not going to go there. That doesn't look like a very business-friendly state. I think I can make the case pretty persuasively that that's not good for us as Pennsylvanians.
More broadly, how do you propose to work with the legislature, which is likely to remain a Republican legislature, and so much of what your plans, so much of what you plan depends on getting separation from the legislature?
Right. Let me start saying I will do no worse than this governor has done in that regard. Second, I think there's a crisis. We're out of denial in Pennsylvania. I think the legislature, both parties, both houses, recognize that things are not going in the right direction. There's a huge, real budget deficit from 2013, and it looks like 2014 was done with some gimmicks that will make this budget put us in deficit. So I think people are saying, okay, we recognize that at this point in time we have to do some things we haven't done before. And if somebody comes to us with a good set of ideas, we might, not all of us, but some of us might suspend the partisanship and say, let's get Pennsylvania to a better place, because before we're Republicans or Democrats. we're also Pennsylvanians. Now, I'm not being naive, I don't think, and I certainly know that many Republicans won't do that, but I think that there will be enough in the House and enough in the Senate who actually believe we ought to have, for example, a severance tax. I mean, members of Republican leadership are talking about that right now. And I think in some of these other areas, I'll be able to appeal to the side of them that you know, can appeal to, which has reason, and say, if we want to get to a better place, these are just things where this is not partisanship, this is not a Democratic or a Republican solution, this is a Pennsylvania solution. If we want to get to a point where we can actually afford to have the public goods our citizens, Republican and Democrats alike, want, then let's figure out how we're going to pay for those things. Let's do it in a fair fashion.
Are there legislators you feel specifically you can work with, that you've worked with in the past, or you feel like you can work
Well,
with?
it's a good question. I haven't identified down to the single legislator. When I was there as Secretary of Revenue, I did work across the aisle because, as you recall, when I was there was a marginally Democratic House and a Republican Senate, and I was able to get some things done that were specifically important to the Revenue Department, and was able to work across the aisle. Again, my sense, I keep saying this, but I was struck when I was there, not by how different people in Harrisburg are, but by how similar they are. And that they're human beings who react to the same incentives, inducements as anybody else in the other contexts I've worked in. And I was impressed by the ability of people to see virtue in a good argument. And I think that's, in the end, what I'm going to have to do, what any leader is going to have to do in Harrisburg. I don't care what the party designation is. But you're going to have to come up with good arguments that are persuasive. And if you can do that, I think I'll get enough votes in both houses to do what I want to do.
But Governor, before you talked about businesses looking at Pennsylvania and get sticker shock. Governor Corbett has maintained that a severance tax will scare drillers away from Pennsylvania. Do you not share any of that? Do you think that's an exaggerated concern?
Well, again, I actually ran a business, built a business twice.
Mm-hmm.
He hasn't. I think I have a pretty good sense of what businesses do, how they respond to tax disincentives and incentives. Obviously, if you made a confiscatory tax, put a confiscatory tax on any industry, they're not going to come to Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the 9.99% corporate net income tax is an example of that.
Mm-hmm.
When I was Secretary of Revenue, I don't know if they still do that. When I was Secretary of Revenue, Department of Community and Economic Development actually had a line item in their budget to pay for Big Four accounting firms to counsel companies thinking about coming to Pennsylvania as to how to avoid paying the corporate net income tax, which is, I think, an indication of how idiotic that is. 5% is not 10%, and a 5% severance tax, I think, is not too high. Texas is around 7.5%. So I don't think it's too high that would scare the business away. The gas is here, the market's here. Second, I think we need to do something like that to make sure that people all around Pennsylvania feel that there's something in it for them. This industry is going to require educational programs that create skills that are relevant to the industry. Can't do that for free. It's going to require infrastructure. It's going to require places that don't have gas to say, I'm willing to consider, having pipeline in my municipality because we all benefit from a strong gas industry. Right now, we can't say that. So my argument is that a modest 5% severance tax would only not scare the industry away, since we're the only gas-producing state without a severance tax, but would actually make them feel that this is a stronger partnership, a better way to establish the partnership they want to make sure that gas thrives here. If we do it right, this could be a great foundation for Pennsylvania's economy.
In your plan, there just seems to be a lot of demands on the monies from that severance tax. Are you confident that the 5% is going to give you the revenue that you need to do all the things that you want to do, the proceeds from that tax?
Yeah, keep in mind what I'm focused on with the severance tax is education. Right. And I can do that. The $1 billion that was cut were actually down $580 million compared to the last year of the Rendell administration in terms of what we're spending on basic education, charter school reimbursement, and the accountability block grant. We take those three accounts, and we're down by about $580 million after 4 years. So my severance tax is really focused on restoring those classroom cuts as a start. And if you look at the $1 billion, that whatever's coming out of the severance tax, and add to that the charter school reimbursement program, if we had the right formula, we could save hundreds of millions. If Jack Wagner said $350 million, I'm using $200 million. If we expanded Medicaid, that's $200 million there. If we got rid of some tax loopholes like the Delaware loophole and did it right, I think there's some money there as well. That's way over the $580 million we're down in education. The other things I'm talking about, like transportation, I think there are ways that we could build on public-private partnerships to do some innovative ways to do financing. Right now, there's a lot of money awash in the world looking for especially infrastructure investment opportunities, public sector investment opportunities. There's also grant money out there that other states have accepted or turned down in some cases. But let me just give you one example. The Panama Canal is being widened right now. Supposedly it'll be finished soon. That keeps moving back. But when that happens, a lot of the container ships that can't get through the canal and now land their stuff in West Coast ports, and then we truck it or rail across the country, will now be able to come through the Panama Canal and come directly to the East Coast ports. That's going to require some inland ports. An inland port is a place where you get the containers. Some of the ports have been upgraded, but nobody's upgraded their infrastructure leading away from the ports. So there's going to be, absent any investments, there's going to be a lot of piling up of containers in these ports. The inland port idea is an idea to find open space that is nicely located, close to these ports, where you can actually get the containers, just get them off the port into the staging area so you can redeploy them or send them to wherever they're going to go. Now, the attributes of those inland ports are you're going to need centralized location close to these ports, and you're going to need some open space. Sounds like Pennsylvania. And if you actually invest in infrastructure that sort of says this is something that's going to be needed, can I find some private investors who might be interested in doing this? Can we create a cash flow for the fees that are going to come from this, from the rail that comes out of those ports, the land that's used for the staging, the new jobs that are created, and the infrastructure that surrounds that could be used for other things, like getting people from place to place more conveniently, more safely, more quickly. No telling what Pennsylvania could do in terms of its economy over a fairly short time at the current tax rates to raise its revenues. In business, I raised my revenues, but I never raised them by raising my prices. I raised them by raising business activity. And I think that's what Pennsylvania can do, taking full and strategic advantage of the natural advantages that we have.
Okay if I continue?
Sure, go ahead.
Another question. You have said repeatedly you cannot be specific about your tax plan, which you love this question. You're getting it everywhere. The Inquirer, though, called your lack of detail in your tax plan fuzzy math. Are voters to just trust the tax plan is going to work, it's going to be fair? Can you understand the concern about the lack of specifics?
No, what I can't understand is why I can't make my point clear, persuasively enough. I think that's unfair. I think I've been as specific as I can possibly be. I'm running a campaign. I don't have the tens of thousands of employees. I don't have the computers or the access to confidential information. For example, I don't think you want me to have information on your income. You shouldn't. That should be confidential. When I was at Revenue, it was confidential. And so I can't get it. I don't deserve to get it unless I win an election. So without that information, I'm not sure how I can be any more specific in terms of what that rate. Well, the only thing I haven't been specific, I've been specific on the plan. It's a universal exemption, one flat rate. I've been specific on what the middle class is, $70,000 to $90,000 for an individual or wage earner. Double that for a married couple, joint filer. I've been very specific on that, and been very specific that what we need is a system where someone like me pays more than my assistant. I think, or my forklift, or my mechanic. I think that's fair. But I think my mechanic makes a lot of money. But, so I think I've been very specific on that, and I can't be more specific without, I can't condemn. So I've been specific, very specific, except for saying the tax rate will be this, the exemption will be that. That's all I haven't been able to come up with. And if I don't have the numbers, I can't really come up with an honest answer. Now, I don't know, I'll be honest with you, I don't know how cold this winter's gonna be either. And I think if I made an opinion and said this is going to be the coldest winter on record, that'd be a lie. I might hit it, but I might not, and it would be dishonest of me to pretend that I could come up with that answer. It would be dishonest of me to pretend that I could come up with this answer absent the income information. And by the way, I also don't know how deep the hole is going to be that this governor's going to leave the next administration. Whichever one of us wins, there's going to be some really hard work to be done to fill that hole. And neither he nor I knows what the size of that hole is. And if we don't know either of those things, what the income data is, what the size of that hole is going to be, it would be really dishonest to try to be specific on the rate and the exemption. Other than that, I have been very specific.
And you're confident that your opponent, the governor, has said that your plan would be unconstitutional?
Mhm. And again,
Can you address that?
Yes, I can. Be happy to. I mean, that just shows a lack of understanding of what I'm talking about. I mean, it's easy to throw these charges around. And there's a germ of truth in the unconstitutional. The Pennsylvania Constitution has it's called a uniformity clause. Mm-hmm. In the 1970s, the first income tax failed the test, the uniformity clause test. The Supreme Court ruled it unconstitutional because the first income tax was a federal-like tax with brackets, so that you actually had different rates, and that was ruled unconstitutional. So my plan does not have different rates. It's a universal exemption, which we have right now. It's called the special poverty provision. It's just calculated differently than I've calculated, and we have one rate. That's what I'm talking about. So anything's possible. The Supreme Court, if it were asked to rule on it, might rule that the tax system we have right now is unconstitutional, but it's been in place for 40 years. And my plan is right in line with the system we have right now. It's just with a different I think an easier calculation for the exemption.
Okay, did you want to ask about the legislature on that?
I wanted to
With regard to that?
ask some questions about pension reform.
Mhm.
You have said that the unfunded liability is not necessarily a crisis, but that it could possibly become a crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And what constitutes a crisis in your eyes, and how do you plan to deal with this unfunded liability?
I am surprised that this semantic thing has metastasized into this thing that frankly, I look at Illinois and I say that's a crisis. We're not where Illinois is. Now, somebody might take issue with me and saying, okay, where we are is a crisis and Illinois is a bigger crisis. Okay. I am not denying that we have a problem. Whether it's a crisis or a problem or an issue, okay. I'm fine with characterizing however you want to characterize it. We have to address it. And that's the bottom line. We should have addressed it a long time ago, and governors in a bipartisan fashion, I'm not pointing fingers here, haven't done that. It's time that we do. And there are two issues here. And the one is that people like to talk about so much is the plan design part. That's the TOBASH plan, the hybrid, defined benefit, defined contribution above a certain level. And my thought there is, well, we actually have dealt with that. And why don't we just give it a chance to work? I know we want to keep coming and litigating the design aspect of it, but Act 120 actually, the part of Act 120 I like is that it actually created a less expensive pension benefit for employees who were hired starting back in, I think, 2010. And I'd like to give that a chance to work. Now, the second part is what no one was talking about, or they're more cagey about, and that is that over the course of the last 10 plus years, the employer, the Commonwealth, has not been putting adequate money into the fund. When you talk to governors, they say, no, we've been funding it adequately. Adequacy is the problem, the definition. In the 2000 bill, I think it was, the legislature actually legislated assumptions into the pension plan that as a private employer we can't do. First of all, interest rates are off the table. They tell you what they're going to calculate when they buy an annuity. But the other thing they legislated in was the return. And so when you have an actuary come in and sit down with high return and a fixed interest rate, they say, you look like you're pretty well funded. For a private sector group, if you have a defined benefit plan, your accountant comes in first of all and says, you can't have that high an assumption on your return because the market's just not doing that. And especially around 2007, 2008, 2009, when the market was really tanking, anything was tough, and everybody was arguing with their accountants. Then the actuary would come in and say, okay, you have a reasonably low interest rate assumption, because right now interest rates are low. You have a reasonably low return assumption. Based on that, you owe this for your defined benefit plan, which is a lot of money. State didn't do that. State, having legislated those two assumptions into fairly nice ways, the actuaries came in and said, you seem to be pretty well funded. The problem is they weren't well funded. And from a normal actual point of view, they weren't. And that gap is not $47 billion, that's the pension liability. It's only $9 to $10 billion. And that's what we need to make up. And it's a debt, basically, that we haven't paid as employers, as citizens, to our employees, teachers, public sector workers, and we have to pay it. And every time we underpay that, it's like a credit card debt. The balance keeps going up, and it compounds. So I'm going to pay that, and that's the tricky question that no one really wants to talk about. How we do that, I think a pension obligation bond would be an idea, but there's some criticisms of pension obligation bonds. If somebody has a better idea, I'm fine. The only thing I won't compromise on is we need to not delay payment. Should have mentioned that in my first 200 days. That's going to be in the thing too. And I will work with the legislature on the way to do that, but we have to do that. That's the thing no one's talking about. I think giving the provisions of Act 120 a chance to work. For example, it's a contributory defined benefit plan. The employees put, I think, about 30% more than anybody else in the country into the plan. Up until Act 120, they were allowed to take up to 30% out in lump sum payout. Moving forward, employees hired after 2010 will not be allowed to do that. Moving forward, it's a 10-year vesting. Moving forward, I don't know how we get away with that. In my company, it's either 5 or cliff or 7-year phased. They're going to share in the risk, 5.5% and below the employees' return on the investment of the fund. Employees actually get a reduced benefit from that.
But it's still a defined benefit plan. In today's workforce, rarely do people have defined benefit plans anymore. Why do state workers and members of the legislature, why do they deserve a defined benefit plan?
Yeah, I can't speak for the legislature. I have a defined benefit plan and a defined contribution plan. And we moved in my company to a defined contribution plan for a couple of reasons. One, the defined benefit plan, I didn't think, and the people who actually put it into place when I was gone, but I agree with them, thought was not rich enough. I think we were about 4 to 5% of the compensation over the life of the employment. We now have a defined contribution plan that actually gives up to 10.5% to employees. Only 3% is on the part of the employee. The company puts 3% in whether you put anything in or not. We'll match the next, you put up to 3% and we'll match that, so that's now 9%. And for older, more senior employees who were moving from the defined benefit to the defined contribution plan, we had another 150 basis points. Court cases right now are starting to appear where employees in defined contribution plans are coming to court saying, my employer did not tell me that I wasn't gonna have enough money when I retired. I don't know whether you have a contribution or benefit plan here. But one of the things that employees are saying is basically, I expected to have the money I needed to retire. And I don't care how I get there, but whether it's defined benefit or defined contribution, but if this defined contribution plan gets me to a place I'm not happy with, I'm gonna take you to court. So far, courts have ruled in favor of the employers. But the thinking is, at least my company, that we have to take extra effort, make extra effort to make sure the employee is saving toward retirement security. That's what that's about. And anything else, we've got to be careful. In the public sector, that defined benefit plan really, therefore, is not that much at odds with what I think the private sector is moving toward. And second, if you look at that in the context of the overall compensation program, it's not that far out of line. For example, if you're a math major in college and you have the offer of going to work for IBM or to teach mathematics in school, you're going to get a lot less money for teaching mathematics in school. But there are certain things that you can look at that might make that look better than IBM. One, the retirement benefits are going to be good. And so standing alone, isolated from everything else, you can say those retirement benefits are really, rich. But in the context of the overall compensation plan, the compensation plan itself is not that rich. In fact, it's still less than what you get at IBM. But the other thing you get going into teaching is some level of certainty. And that, in many cases, is enough to tip somebody over to going to work in the public sector rather than for IBM. Less volatility and more security and a better pension plan. When I was revenue secretary, I'd have trouble competing with the private sector and getting good people to work for me because the base compensation is well below what they get in the private sector. But if I said, but take a look at the overall package, health, which is pretty good, and retirement, which is very good, I could sometimes convince them to come to work at revenue. Not all the time. It was not a slam dunk. It was not, still was not easy, but it was better. So, I mean, you're right, Karen, that if we just look at the benefit right now, private sector is more defined contribution, but I think that might change. But it's certainly, even accepting that, the pension benefit at the public sector is still better, given what they made while they were in their career, is still better than most private sector pensions. I'm not sure it's better than the one we give in my company, but still richer than many private sector pension plans. But again, if you look at that combined with the other compensation elements of the compensation package, it's really not out of line.
I'm sorry.
So I just had something that was much more narrow, but can you talk a little bit about our state system for selling alcohol? And
Yeah, I am probably, this is counterintuitive. Someone who is the product and a fan of the private sector would be against privatization, but here's my argument. The state store system was put into place in the 1930s, basically to try to keep people from buying alcohol. It's now moved into a much more of a retail operation from really the Ridge administration. I mean, some of the foundations were set in the Casey administration, but the Ridge administration really tried to make it more consumer friendly, and I think succeeded in doing that. What we've created is a system that actually does provide some revenue for the state. And if we did a good job with it, could actually provide a lot more tax revenue. I think what citizens want more than anything is a better way to buy wine and spirits. And I think the state has an obligation to do that. Now, I come with a business background. Maybe that makes that a bias that I can take that and turn that into something that could create revenues that we're not now getting. And at the same time, make it convenient for Pennsylvanians to buy what they want. So that would be my goal would be to make it work.
why would the state, of all the issues in the state, we talk about transportation, pensions, sit around and say, well, we know how to run a liquor store better than anyone else in the United States.
From your explanation, it's very clear that the system itself doesn't even need to exist anymore. It exists because we're making money off of it. And in fact, it's not all that easy. I mean, people come to Pennsylvania and think our system is backwards.
Mhm.
They can buy wine, wherever they want to buy wine, at a grocery store, at a gas station, whatever. They can buy beer, wine together. It's not convenient here.
Mhm.
It's really not.
Right, so and again, I think there's a lot of agreement on that. But my argument is that this is what we have. It's a resource, and it is built up, it's owned by Pennsylvanians. And you can give it away on the ideological notion that it really doesn't make sense to do this, but here we have it.
Well, you don't give it away, you sell it.
Well,
They make a lot of money selling it.
Okay, so that's a third way, because right now we're talking about giving it away. If you look at the way it was priced, basically when you do a present value of the cash stream, you can actually reduce that value simply by doing a bad job with what you're doing. And there's some arguments that may be what we're seeing here. I think it's a resource, and I think it's something like the lottery, which is also in the public sector. Has actually created a source of revenues that I think could be useful for Pennsylvania. Again, if the question is, are you an ideological purist on whether you want this to be in the private sector or the public sector, I get that, I can't argue that. But if your argument, which I think your argument is that you want it to be run better, I agree with that.
That's the question I'm asking. It's not
Can it be done?
ideological. Who can run it better, the private sector or the public sector? I would argue that the private sector.
Why?
Because I go to other states and see it run better by the
Well,
private sector.
I did my PhD at MIT, and one of the problems that Massachusetts had was that everybody back in the 70s was going to New Hampshire to get their alcohol, which is a public sector operation. They were actually running it more efficiently up there. People were running up to.
Well, that was a tax issue, we just didn't tax it the same as Massachusetts. So everything was cheaper.
So
Yeah,
what's
so-
okay? So but then
No, I think
conversely,
they were buying. I think they were actually.
If you go to those big warehouses.
They did. Yeah, no. But I think they were doing it more efficiently. So they were actually attracting. New Hampshire did have those. Remember, you go into you go across the border and they had dog tracks. You could buy lottery tickets, and they had the state store all at one place. Just easy on, easy off.
I just have, I think what we're struggling to understand is how Pennsylvania can do it better than, say, Costco. Costco sells alcohol in other states.
Right.
How would you, for one thing, how would you do it better than Costco?
Well, first of all, by buying better. Pennsylvania is the biggest purchaser of distilled spirits in the world. I think second only to Costco in terms of wine purchases. One of the things that Costco does really well is translates that buying power into better prices. And I think Pennsylvania could do a better job with that. I think Pennsylvania right now confines itself to distributing its alcohol within the state borders. I don't know why that is. Why couldn't we sell to, especially Pennsylvania, affiliates of Pennsylvania companies selling in neighboring states? Why is Costco buying its wine on its own? Maybe if we bought the wine. I'm not sure people have asked that question. The question is always privatization or keeping it public. And public seems to connote inefficiency, but I think there's a third choice, and that is trying to make the system we have work better, modernizing it, so-called.
I guess my other question about that, and then we'll move on, because we've got
Yeah, I
other things
didn't
to talk
mean
about,
to
but that's
keep us
okay.
here for half
As you
an
can
hour
tell,
about
this is a
liquor.
really important issue to cover.
I think this is more about us than you.
But we have a dear family friend who works for the state store, and I guess the system now seems to work better for the state store employees than for the people of Pennsylvania. And I think that's the perception of that. I think that's why a lot of people think
Right.
Pennsylvania needs to get out of business, because what it seems to be serving now, my apologies to our dear family friend, but it seems to be working better for the people who work for the state stores than for the people who shop there.
Well, it's interesting, you brought up the comparison with Costco. Costco actually treats their employees very well, too. And I think the key is management, how you take advantage of your buying power. And it's not the price you pay or the benefits you give to your employees. Yes, I think it's true that state store employees are well paid and have good benefits. But as Costco shows, you can have a very successful operation that is very customer friendly with good payment, good compensation for your employees. I would just like to try that. And I think if we give that a try, we could actually make that unusual experiment work pretty well here in Pennsylvania. This is what we've had since the 1930s, and I think rather than just throw it out, let's get what we want, which is the convenience, and give that a try. Then if it doesn't work, then you have something to talk about. But right now, it's privatization as a means to the end of more convenience. I'm saying if that's the end, let's try to get to that end with the way we have it.
You referred to this earlier, and I just wonder if we could go back before we move on to another issue, and we do have a couple other things we want to ask you about. But you have said you wanted the state to cover half the costs of K through 12 education. Obviously, education is a big issue in this, and may account for how well you're doing in the race so far. Parents, I think, just are concerned about the way that our schools are faring these days. But again, how are we going to get to 50%? How is the state going to cover 50%?
When Ed Rendell ran, he tried to bring it to 50%. I think he got us to the 40s in his 8 years, and in his last couple of years, he was facing an economic meltdown that was making it difficult to get to that. Whether he would have gotten there had the economy not tanked or not is a good question. But I think I'm looking at getting to 50% as quickly as possible, and I think part of that is Marcellus shale tax, but a bigger part of that is creating the conditions for robust private sector growth. That is actually, I think, what the future has to be state-owned. When he was governor, there was a bipartisan costing out study that was done that showed that suggested that we were billions of dollars behind in terms of the funding for public education. And he started to address that by putting money into education to get to the point that study thought we ought to be at. And there were two things that he was concerned about: fairness and adequacy. So equity and adequacy. And we have, I think, gone backwards on both those things. The fair funding formula that we had in place was suspended. And as for adequacy, instead of moving toward that goal, the costing out study, we've actually gone backwards. So I would put a fair funding formula back. I don't think it's that hard to come up with. And I would look at a plan to get us to 50% funding as quickly as possible. And I think the bulk of that has to be through economic growth. Some of that might be with switching from the reliance on the local property tax to reducing that to making up with a broader statewide tax. But it's not going to happen overnight, and it's not going to happen with just one tax.
And again, you're going to need the cooperation of the legislature.
Yeah, I think the cooperation of the legislature, again, when you're not looking at raising taxes, but actually raising economic growth, is going to be easier, especially if I can raise money for things like when I was talking about the inland port. That's just an example. But those kind of investments from public-private partnerships that don't require taxes, that we can use some innovative sources of funding that could actually provide a real return. I don't think the degree of difficulty is great.
Did you want to ask about nothing?
Oh yeah, a couple of weeks ago, Suzanne and I met with some folks from Penn Future, and we were all talking about the issue of methane emissions from natural gas pads, drilling sites. And the one thing that we came upon is, why doesn't the state do more to penalize the drillers when they exceed certain limits? And there was some discussion of fines. Yes, we do fine companies, but they pay the fine and move on. What would you do, what can you do to stiffen those penalties? I mean, can you revoke drilling licenses
Mhm.
for certain periods of time.
Yeah.
Would you be willing to, increase those penalties
Yeah.
for
That's what-
pollution, spillage
Yeah.
of methane?
I think as I mentioned, one of the things that I'd want to take money from the Marcellus shale tax would be to beef up the Department of Environmental Protection, and maybe health as well. And I think there are two things we got to do in DEP. One is to make sure we have adequate staffing. Because right now, even if you're in business and you're the most incredibly conservative business person, you're unhappy with how long it takes to get permits turned around. Months in some cases for just routine permits. So we need more people, and we need to make sure that we have the regulations in place. I do not want regulations that simply say, if you make a mistake, here's how hard I'm going to slap you on the wrist. And it could be higher fines. They have to be punitive enough and severe enough that it actually makes someone step back and take notice. But I think DEP really ought to be working on the preventive side. I don't want methane leaks. I don't want someone to say, you have a methane leak, I'm going to punish you. I don't want those methane leaks in the first place. So I think we need to get to clean air, clean water regulations that actually would prevent that, would create
Sure.
incentives for companies to prevent those things from happening. But knowing that no one's perfect, when they do happen, that we have the appropriate penalties in
Sure.
place so that it creates the incentive for them not to want to
Sure.
have leakage.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that if a company comes in and builds up a pad, a couple of sites, and they know that their license can be revoked if they have a certain number of spills,
Yeah.
they're not gonna do it.
Right. I think I'm a better company in many ways because of a lot of regulations, safety regulations and things like that make me a better company, so that I don't want to pay that fine. I don't want to pay the penalty, and I want to prevent them.
Beyond staffing levels, how do you think the Corbett administration has run the DEP? And do you think sweeping changes need to be made in that department?
The Auditor General recently released a report saying that the DEP regulations are inadequate and the staffing is inadequate. And I think I would start, I really want to get this right. I think if we don't get this right, what could be a game changer for our economy is going to be discredited. And I think most of the companies in the gas industry want to get it right. Because they recognize that if they don't get it right, they're not going to have the legitimacy, they're not going to have the support they're going to need to continue to do business in Pennsylvania. So I'm going to start with the recommendations of the Auditor General, but to the extent I feel I need to go beyond them, I will. And I think I have people who are good business people, but who recognize that the long-term interest of the industry is absolutely the same as the long-term interest of Pennsylvanians in keeping our environment clean.
Yeah, we've talked about air in Lancaster County. Beautiful Lancaster County has air quality issues, which is could be a business concern.
It is a business concern. As a kitchen cabinet person, volatile organic compounds, much more sensitive to that in the Susquehanna, the Chesapeake, Potomac sink than other places in the country, because we have an air quality problem here, and mainly automobile induced. But it means that we have lower tolerance for things like a lot of furniture companies that used to exist here really have a tough time because one of the regulations, the air quality regulations that the EPA has, it makes it tough for them to operate. So it does have severe business consequences, but it doesn't mean we can't live within them and learn from them.
Yeah, in the state changed a few years back its right to know. So the presumption is now that the people have, that everything's public unless told otherwise. The state-related schools, particularly Penn State, exempted from that. And so you can find anything out you want about all the other Big Penn schools, except Northwestern is private, Penn State. Should Penn State and the other state religions be exempted from the state right to know law?
I don't think so.
Okay, that was quick. I have another question for you.
No, I think transparency is a really important thing. And I keep saying this, that and maybe it's my academic background, but I'm running because I'm running on the basis of policies that I think are going to make Pennsylvania better, and that's transactional politics, as it normally is. But I recognize that I'm also running as to be a steward of a democratic tradition, and that part of what I have to do is to make democracy work better. And I think restoring trust in government is important, which is why ethics is at the top of my list when I start. But I think what you're talking about, transparency, is another thing that is key to a healthy democracy, and I don't think we have that.
Well, it's a perfect segue to my question, but then I know Bob has a question. What I'd like to just, you and your family have donated quite a lot to the campaign.
$10 million.
Right. Are you comfortable with the system in which wealthy politicians can finance their own campaigns? Dave, you?
No, I'd like to see campaign finance reform. I'm playing by the rules as they are. One of the things I'd say in my defense is that, first of all, no one knew who I was when I started, and this was my way of getting my name out. And all I figured it would do would be to get my name and my background out, and the voters would at least have a chance to decide. I was going up against at least two other, at one point there were 10 or 11 people in the primary, but in the end, two people who were much better known than I, and who had run statewide campaigns before. And so to counter the impact, the effect of incumbency, that was what I had. So I did it because that was what I had available to me. I hadn't been a career politician. Second, I am beholden to no special interest because my biggest contributor was me. And my second, third, and fourth biggest contributors were individuals, some of them family members. So, and in the primary, I didn't think had any major, party or special interest contribution to my campaign. And it made me a free agent, and I think in that way liberated me. But we need to come up with some way to level that playing field. I think we need to be careful about making sure we don't level it in a way that just simply then concedes more ground to the power of incumbency. I like the idea of a citizen politician. That's what I am. I haven't done this before. I don't plan to do it again, and for any other job. I think that's the way democracy is supposed to work.
I'm sorry, Bob, did you want to ask the pipeline question, just quickly?
You mentioned earlier the importance of getting natural gas to
The
market.
full page.
The Atlantic Sunrise pipeline is, in preliminary plans, to come through Lancaster County. Do you have a position on that placement of the pipeline through Lancaster County? It's a very sensitive issue in this county.
Yeah, I've spoken with some of the people pushing that and said, absent a severance tax, what is it in for Lancaster County? We don't have gas here. We don't have gas in York County. So you're asking us to make way for a pipeline that could have some problems. It's going to have a right of way. And as far as I can see, you're just saying to Lancastrians, do this because it'll help my stockholders. That's not a really very persuasive argument. If we had a severance tax, I, as governor, would go to people in Lancaster and York counties and say, now there's something for us. If we make this work, and to make it work, we need adequate distribution. It should be safe. It should not be, harmful. But we are going to need to have it in our backyards, just like we have the Trans-Texas pipeline in our backyard over in York County. I think you do here too. But this will help our schools. It'll help our environment because it'll create the jobs, the revenues that'll help support that. Then I can make a different argument. So there are two answers to that question. Right now, absent broad severance tax, I think Lancastrians are right to say, why should I put up with this? Maybe the risk isn't that great, but there is some risk. And I'm not seeing any benefit to me or any other Pennsylvanian unless I have gas, and I don't. So, but if there's going to be benefit for this, if our economy is going to be advanced because we have a strong, healthy gas industry, if we're going to get a 5% severance tax that's going to help my schools in Lancaster County, then maybe the argument's different.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks
Thank
very
you.
much. It's nice to be back. Still, how we got running.
Yes, it is.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.